There is one detail in the Stephanie White controversy that keeps pulling people back into the story, and it has almost nothing to do with the final score. After the intense backlash surrounding Connecticut's matchup with Indiana, White's social media presence reportedly disappeared, and suddenly a basketball controversy became something much bigger. Fans were already arguing over the physicality involving Caitlin Clark. They were debating individual plays, defensive decisions, and whether Clark was being treated differently. Then came the apparent disappearance of White's account, and the internet immediately began filling in the blanks. That is where this story gets complicated. Was stepping away from social media simply a personal decision? Was it an attempt to escape an overwhelming wave of criticism? Or did Caitlin Clark's enormous fan base interpret the move as something much more significant? There is no confirmed evidence in the source establishing exactly why White's account disappeared, but the reaction itself is impossible to ignore. Because this was never just about one coach deleting an account. Caitlin Clark has brought an enormous amount of attention into every game she plays, and with that attention comes something the WNBA cannot easily control: millions of people watching the smallest moments and forming their own conclusions. A hard defensive play can become a national debate. A coach's reaction can become a headline. A social media decision can suddenly be treated like a statement. And once that happens, the pressure changes completely. For White, the controversy arrived from an especially complicated position. She knows the Fever environment. She knows Clark. But now she stands on the opposite side of the matchup, coaching a Connecticut team that found itself under intense scrutiny from Clark supporters. The source portrays that backlash as relentless, with fans accusing the Sun of crossing a line in how Clark was defended. Whether those accusations are fair is precisely where the debate begins. Some viewers see passionate fans demanding accountability. Others see an online pylon that can turn ordinary basketball decisions into personal attacks. And somewhere between those two interpretations sits Stephanie White, suddenly at the center of a conversation that grew far beyond the game itself. That is why the disappearing account became such a powerful image. It gave everyone something to interpret, even though it did not provide an explanation. And this is where everything changed. Because once the argument moved from the basketball court to the public square, the question was no longer simply whether a defensive play was too aggressive. The question became how much pressure a coach, player, or organization can withstand when Caitlin Clark's fan base decides that something has gone too far. The game ended. The argument didn't. And the most revealing part of this controversy may be what happened after the final whistle. By the time Connecticut met Indiana, this was never going to feel like an ordinary WNBA matchup. When Caitlin Clark is on the floor, every possession carries another layer of attention. A routine defensive sequence can become a replay. A hard foul can become a debate. A coaching decision can become a discussion that lasts long after the game is over. That is the environment surrounding Clark now. And the Fever-Sun matchup became another flashpoint because fans believed some of the physicality directed toward Clark had crossed a line. The source presents that interpretation forcefully, describing supporters who felt Clark was being subjected to excessive contact. But there is an important distinction here. A hard defensive play can look completely different depending on who is watching it. One viewer sees aggressive, physical basketball. Another sees unnecessary contact. And claims that an entire league is deliberately targeting Clark remain allegations, not established facts. That disagreement is exactly what made the situation so combustible. Then there was Stephanie White. White was not simply another opposing coach. She had previously coached Indiana, which meant she already had a history with the organization and familiarity with the environment surrounding Clark. Now she was on the other bench, leading Connecticut, and every decision made against Indiana could be examined through that history. That creates an unusual kind of pressure. When a coach who once stood on one side of the story suddenly finds herself on the other, people naturally start looking for meaning in everything. Defensive schemes, reactions on the sideline, decisions during critical possessions, even silence afterward. For Clark supporters, the question was whether the physical approach against her was simply competitive basketball or something that deserved greater scrutiny. For others, the reaction itself raised another concern. Had the conversation around Clark become so intense that every aggressive defensive sequence was destined to become a controversy? And that is the real pressure point. Because once the spotlight becomes this powerful, nobody involved gets to experience the game as just a game anymore. The players feel it. The coaches feel it. The fans certainly feel it. And Stephanie White found herself standing directly in the middle of it. Then came the moments that changed the temperature of the entire conversation. Watching them once was one thing. Watching them again and again was something completely different. The source highlights physical plays involving Caitlin Clark that quickly became the center of attention, with supporters examining every movement and asking whether the contact was simply part of aggressive defense or something more concerning. And this is where the replay effect takes over. Slow the footage down, and suddenly every detail becomes important. The positioning, the timing, the point of contact, the reaction afterward. One viewer can watch the same sequence and see a defender playing hard, trying to disrupt a dangerous offensive player. Another viewer can watch it and see contact that did not need to happen. Neither interpretation automatically proves intent. That distinction matters, because the source makes much stronger claims about deliberate targeting than the evidence presented actually establishes. There is no confirmed proof here of a coordinated plan to injure Clark. What is undeniable is that the plays generated a powerful reaction from viewers who already believed Clark was receiving unusually physical treatment. And once those viewers started sharing the clips, the context changed. The conversation was no longer confined to people who watched the entire game. Short clips began carrying the controversy to people who saw only the most dramatic moments. Every replay reinforced whatever conclusion someone had already reached. For Clark supporters, the plays became another example in what they believed was a growing pattern. For critics of that interpretation, the reaction looked like an online audience turning normal competitive basketball into something much larger. And standing at the center of that argument was Stephanie White. As Connecticut's head coach, White became closely associated with the team's defensive approach, whether that association was fair or not. Once fans connected the physical plays with Connecticut's game plan, criticism naturally moved toward the person responsible for the team. That is how a basketball decision becomes a personal controversy. The game itself lasted only a few hours. The reaction had no such limit. By the time the final whistle disappeared from the headlines, the real story had already moved somewhere else, into social media, into fan debates, and eventually into the growing pressure surrounding Stephanie White. The most important moment was no longer happening on the court. It was happening everywhere afterward. And then the conversation left the basketball court completely. What followed was a wave of online reaction aimed at Stephanie White, the Connecticut organization, and the way Clark was being defended. The source is filled with comments from angry supporters, with some accusing the team of allowing overly physical treatment and demanding that the league take the situation more seriously. Those comments reveal the intensity of the reaction, but they remain fan opinions, not independent proof that the accusations themselves are true. That distinction became almost impossible to maintain once the internet got involved. Some supporters saw the backlash as accountability. From their perspective, fans had watched enough physical plays involving Clark and were finally refusing to stay quiet. They believed the enormous audience following Clark had every right to scrutinize what happened and demand better protection for a player they considered central to the league's future. But another interpretation emerged just as quickly. Critics could look at the same flood of messages and see an online pylon. A coach makes basketball decisions during a competitive game, a few controversial plays happen, and suddenly thousands of people are directing anger toward one individual. From that perspective, the reaction itself becomes part of the problem. And then came the detail that gave the entire controversy a visual symbol. White's social media account reportedly disappeared. For supporters already convinced that the backlash had become serious, that disappearance looked significant. Some interpreted it as evidence that the pressure had finally become overwhelming. Others could see something much simpler, a person choosing to step away from social media during an intense period of criticism. There is no confirmed explanation in the source establishing why the account disappeared. But online debates rarely wait for certainty. People fill the silence with their own interpretation, and suddenly the absence of a post becomes a story in itself. That is what made this controversy so powerful. The same action could be interpreted as retreat, self-protection, frustration, or simply a decision to disconnect. Nobody had the complete answer. Yet everyone seemed ready to explain it. And once that happened, Stephanie White was no longer being judged only on what happened during the game. She was being judged through the lens of everything fans believed the moment represented. Now this is where we need to slow everything down, because the loudest version of a story is not always the most accurate version. The source makes several powerful claims about Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, and the WNBA, but there is a difference between what is actually established and what the commentary believes those events mean. What we can establish from the source is that White's social media account reportedly disappeared after the controversy and that fans reacted intensely to the situation. What we cannot establish from that fact alone is why the account disappeared. The source interprets the move as White being unable to handle the backlash, but that is an interpretation, not a confirmed explanation from White herself. And that distinction matters. The same problem appears in the much larger claims about Clark's treatment around the league. The source repeatedly describes the physicality as deliberate and coordinated, even suggesting a league-wide effort against Clark. But the material provided does not establish the existence of such a conspiracy. That does not mean fans cannot be angry. It means the anger and the evidence have to be separated. There is also another layer to this story that makes it more complicated. Fans are not judging these moments from a neutral position. Many Clark supporters already believe she has been subjected to unnecessary physicality, while others believe the intensity surrounding her has caused ordinary competitive plays to receive extraordinary scrutiny. Both sides are watching the same footage. Both sides are seeing the same account disappear. But they are reaching completely different conclusions. And that is why reducing this to Stephanie White quit because Caitlin Clark fans turned on her misses the more interesting story. The source does not establish that White quit her coaching position because of the backlash. Instead, it shows how quickly a controversial basketball moment can become a much larger argument about accountability, fandom, media coverage, and pressure. The real story is not that every accusation has been proven. The real story is that the argument became powerful enough for almost everyone involved to be viewed through a different lens. And once that happens, even silence can become controversial. But the Stephanie White controversy is only the visible part of something much bigger. Caitlin Clark has changed the scale of the conversation around the WNBA. The source argues that her arrival dramatically increased attention, attendance, commercial interest, and fan engagement across the league. Some of the specific financial and viewership figures cited in the source are not independently documented in the material we have, so those numbers should be treated cautiously. But the broader point is impossible to miss within this story. Clark has brought an unusually large and intensely engaged audience into the league. And that audience does not simply watch the games. They watch everything. They watch the fouls. They watch the reactions. They watch the benches. They study coaching decisions. They replay controversial moments. They examine interviews and social media posts. And when they believe something important has been ignored, they take the argument directly to the public. That changes the pressure on everyone. A coach can no longer assume that a controversial decision will disappear when the arena empties. A player can make one aggressive defensive play and find thousands of people discussing it within minutes. An organization can release a statement, or choose not to release one, and both decisions can become part of the story. The White controversy demonstrates exactly how that dynamic works. The question is not simply whether Clark was fouled too hard, whether Connecticut defended her appropriately, or whether White made the correct basketball decisions. The larger question is whether the league can manage an audience that is now far more emotionally invested in individual players and controversies than ever before. Because passionate fandom can be incredibly powerful. It can fill arenas. It can drive attention. It can create new conversations and bring people into a sport they might never have watched before. But that same passion can also create enormous pressure. And when every disagreement becomes a battle over identity, fairness, or the future of the league, basketball can quickly turn into something much more divisive. That is the challenge sitting behind the Stephanie White story. Caitlin Clark did not simply bring more eyes to the WNBA. She brought an audience that is watching closely. And now the entire league has to decide what happens when those millions of eyes refuse to look away. And now we come back to the detail that started this entire conversation: Stephanie White's apparent withdrawal from social media. That image is still sitting there, unresolved. The account disappeared. The backlash had already become intense. Fans were arguing over the physicality involving Caitlin Clark, the decisions made during the game, and whether the reaction from supporters had gone too far. Then White's online presence was suddenly gone, and the internet immediately began trying to explain what it meant. But there is one thing we cannot honestly say. We cannot say that the disappearance proves White was guilty of anything. We cannot say it proves she was forced out. And we cannot say it proves she could no longer handle the pressure. The source simply does not establish those things. What it does show is how powerful the surrounding controversy had become. Maybe White made a personal decision to step away from social media because the attention had become exhausting. Maybe she simply wanted distance from the constant noise surrounding the story. Or perhaps the sheer intensity of the backlash demonstrated just how dramatically the Caitlin Clark era has changed the environment surrounding the WNBA. That last possibility is what makes this story so much bigger than Stephanie White. Because Clark's audience is not watching quietly anymore. They are watching every possession, every collision, every reaction, every coaching decision, and every response afterward. When something feels wrong to them, the discussion does not end when the game ends. It continues across social media, across broadcasts, and across the wider sport conversation. And that creates a completely new kind of pressure. For some people, that pressure represents accountability. For others, it represents an audience becoming too powerful and too quick to judge. The answer remains unresolved. But perhaps that is exactly why this story continues to hold attention. Stephanie White's disappearance from social media may have been nothing more than a personal decision. Or it may become remembered as one of the clearest symbols of how intense the spotlight has become around Caitlin Clark and the WNBA. Either way, one thing has changed. The audience is watching. And after everything that happened, it is becoming much harder for anyone connected to Caitlin Clark's story to assume that controversial moments will simply disappear when the final whistle blows.